My name is Danielle DeRuiter-Williams, and I want to welcome you back to Roots to Results. I'm super excited for our conversation today. I have a dear friend and former coworker and former colleague and forever person in my life, Patrick Brown, with us. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to connect.
Yeah. So, as you know, this podcast is really an opportunity for each of us to thread the needle of the ways in which our early experiences have shaped the lessons that we've learned as leaders and how we are carrying forward both the best parts of our early upbringing into our leadership and also how we've managed to navigate maybe some of the trickier aspects of that as well. And so I'm excited to have this conversation with you in particular today, as you're someone that not only is a leader but also has done a lot of work to train leaders. So maybe we can start by you just sharing a little bit about who Patrick Brown is, where you come from, what work you do, and then we'll get into the real meat of it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to speak with you today. I'm a huge fan of your work and yourself, but I will start with I am from Chicago. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My mother was a social worker, my father worked for the Department of Corrections, and so there was a lot of, service of community. Kind of that was the theme in the household. I went to DePaul University and I found a job doing work study with an organization that did workforce development. So I cut my teeth early in my career in workforce development for formerly incarcerated folks. I ran a program called Green Core Chicago that was very successful in the wave of the green job movement and really became fascinated because you saw these folks who had long criminal histories and kind of had been failed by the education system create these great opportunities and careers with a little bit of opportunity and some guidance. And so I became obsessed with transformation. That job, however, wasn't, it was very hard. It was a lot of long hours. I was doing a lot of the grant writing and the training. And so I burned out in a pretty spectacular fashion, as one does in the nonprofit industrial complex. And so I was approached by Van Jones to be a part of a Green Jobs Fellowship, which you know very well. And yeah, so I came to Oakland and I just decided I needed to make a big change. So I moved to California. I loved Oakland. I loved walking around in the home of the Black Panthers. I loved the way they were talking about food, and I might lived a different kind of life here. So I moved from Chicago to California in the middle of a very successful career. And I did a lot of introspection of how to put myself back together. I put that lens of transformation on myself and started to look at like what skills I needed, what was I good at, what did I need, what did I love to do, what did the world need. And so I ended up in leadership development with a pretty tight focus on transformative change for individuals and communities. I ended up working with the Greenlining Institute, which is a research, policy, and advocacy organization out here. I led the Leadership Academy there for 8 years, helping young early career leaders like springboard their leadership with our expanded network and experiences. So that was very satisfying. And also, I kept running into some of the similar problems my friends were having, of running into like limited capacity for growth and then in the nonprofit sector. And so I joined a couple of different consulting companies before landing on opening my own shop with some friends and colleagues of ours. So now I work with Venture with Purpose and I do a lot of business to business. We do development, organizational change. How do we create better conditions for the most valuable part of a company, which is the staff? So I do a lot of coaching, a lot of training and facilitation. And I love working with companies that like to invest in their staff and their growth because they understand the relationship between the staff's development and their bottom lines.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. Yeah. No, that's great. And I'm sure we'll get back into the burnout experience in later parts of our conversation because it's certainly one that you and I share uh, in a deep and meaningful way. I would
mhm.
love to actually transport ourselves back in time, and I would love to hear what was little Patrick like
Little Patrick may have been described as precocious.
lately.
Yeah, just a little, I was pretty much an extrovert. I remember being in a lot of the activities, in the children's choir and in gymnastics and in taekwondo and Yeah, I was pretty much out there. I was very active. I had a core group of friends that lived in my neighborhood. It was the olden days, so we came home and the street lights came on, and there were a lot of barbecues, and my grandma smoked, and I poured her whiskey. So, it was a different time. But I would say I always knew I had a lot of energy and was mostly extroverted. But I'm a Pisces, and so I also recognized that from an early age I had a big heart. I was always empathic in a way. So not the roughest, toughest person in the crew, more of the tender-hearted one. Yeah.
Yeah. And that theme carries on
Yeah.
today for sure. Are there
Yeah.
some, key moments in your childhood that you feel maybe had a big impact on the leader that you are today?
Yeah, I don't mind sharing that I lost my dad at a very young age. That certainly set a particular trajectory for me. So when I was 5 years old, my father passed away, and there were a lot of challenges in my life early on. So he was a veteran of Vietnam. He was a Green Beret medic. He suffered a lot in his early life and often had terror dreams, and so it was a difficult
Mhm.
transition when he had passed. And so I think that I bonded extra close with my mother after my father passed, obviously, and did whatever I could to make her life a little bit easier. So it shaped me into right away wanting to be of service, wanting to be careful, limiting my own kind of space that I took up to create more space for whatever the family or whatever she needed. I also think there are attachment issues that come when the person loses their primary guardian, one of their guardians, like so early on. So certainly understanding like my relationship to masculinity,
Mhm.
understanding how, yeah, my attachment style, I would say, was affected by losing somebody so early. And yeah, I'm not sure I could I don't think I could name all the ways in which, but it was one key event that definitely shaped my growth and trajectory my whole life, not just my leadership. And I will also say that being raised in Chicago
Mhm.
to a family that was devoted to public service mostly, I think there it shaped me. I understood Chicago in a way that the politics, the community, I was born in 1975, so in the 80s there were lots of community groups that were always just around. I never felt like I wasn't in a thing or at a
Mm.
place,
Mhm.
aged in. And so I just, from an early age, I was like always in a community, in a group. And so intergroup dynamics, right? I was never, even as a only child, I was never alone.
Mhm. Mhm.
So with my cousins and my family, I was like in my choir or I was in the after school program. And so I feel like I did a lot of working in groups when I was younger, which shaped me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm curious because I know, a bit about your mom, and I know that a big part of your commitment to being of service really is was kind of rooted in the strong value that she had around it. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like how her work and her passion influenced you.
Hmm. Okay, Danielle.
So,
So no, it's good. I'm ready. I'm ready. But I just, I love that you're a person that knew my mother,
mhm.
and that she really loved you and knew you on a level as well. Yeah, everything good about me in the world from me comes from my mother for sure. So my mother was, the middle child of three daughters, and her father was a lawyer, her mother was a teacher, and so I think that as she moved through the world, she was born in 44, so like her coming of age took place around in a lot of the civil rights movement. So I
Mhm.
think that when she started seeing campus protests, when she started seeing civil unrest, particularly around race riots and things, as she was on the south side of Chicago as well, she was committed. She went towards the center.
Mhm.
She worked for the Department of Children and Family Services for over 35 years. And so she was very committed to child welfare.
Mhm.
But she was dating a black man when that wasn't popular. She had applied, she had got accepted actually into the Peace Corps. She thought she was going to be of service in the world. But I'll tell you, as she ended up the guardianship administrator, which means she was the legal guardian of 40,000 kids across the state of Illinois
Wow.
for the Department of Family Services, she did some really progressive things, like some of the first, like, gender reassignment surgeries she was supportive of. She worked with kids that had terrible medical conditions that doctors would often kind of brush aside because they were a foster kid or a ward
Hmm.
of the state. So she created a lot of policy and legislation that it created a lot of advocacy pathways for that community. But what I saw as her kid was like she just went to war,
Hmm.
and she was in it. She
Hmm.
was early. She got her master's degree while I was in high school, so she was often gone through the morning, through the evening. She, went to Springfield. We lived in Chicago. She went to Springfield like it was around the corner because she was doing her work. And so, yeah, she was sacrificing a lot of our time together to do her work. And I think I took that on.
Hmm.
I think I understood to really make change in the world, it comes at a personal sacrifice. And later in her life, after she retired, we talked a lot about the things that she needed to sacrifice in order to have the achievements she did and whether she would do it all the same way again. It had a physical toll on her health. It had
Hmm.
an emotional toll on her well-being. It had like a palpable toll on our relationship. And so I really tried to learn from that, but it's just like it's in my DNA that some of the way you serve comes from sacrifice.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it's still true for folks today, but that definitely shaped me and has me thinking about how I'm overextended or overcommitted to the benefit of someone beyond myself. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's so well, one, I love learning new facts about what your mama did. That's like how proud you must be all the time. And it also just reminds me of how much overlap you and I have in our shared experiences of like my mom. I was in middle school and my mom was getting her master's degree. And so she was, had night classes and but worked full time also and also was in social work and, just witnessing the sort of the self-sacrifice as like a pillar of this work. And I think both of us have tried to find a better balance in that, right? Of like you have, that when I like left the practice, I was like, I need to put my own oxygen mask on first. And I really landed on like, this is how can I serve my community if I am depleted, to the point where I can't function. And in a sense, I feel like we sort of get to almost take the sense of duty and responsibility that our each of our mothers like demonstrated through their work, but also learn from their maybe not mistakes is the right word, but the way that they maybe over gave to their own detriment.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, I've been very proud. You were very, this is one of the other mirror moments was, I think you are incredibly successful, but you were incredibly successful and you chose to leave because you knew you needed to do something different for yourself. I think that's incredible.
Hmm.
That's so brave and so, and I think that I left Chicago at a moment where I was very successful and people were like, "Why are you leaving your job?" And I was like, "Cuz I'm going to die.
Yeah,
I'm going to end up
literally.
I'm going to end up no more me. So let me." And I had to like get 2,500 miles away or 2,000 miles away to do it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're right. That's one of the many like parallels in our lives and experiences.
Well, and it's interesting to think like I'm almost on a 10-year delay from you, right? Which tracks with our age difference. It's like you
Exactly.
did the things and I'm coming up behind, like, okay, I'm gonna do it now too. I'm gonna like put it all on the line and, be broke for
Well,
a little while.
you might polish it a little better. It might look nicer when you do it. I mean, thank God,
It's just because
But both
I'm
are
just a girl. That's why. It's just yeah, I love that. One of the things I also would love to chat with you about, and we'll bounce back around, but you know, having we've talked about this before, the audacity and bravery that comes along with being raised by a white mom, like it's
Mhm.
it's like it's like a benevolent Karen vibe that I know you and I are able to embody in service of other people. And so I would love to hear the ways in which maybe in your own sort of being a leader and advocating for leaders, where maybe you've been able to lean into that or that's been like beneficial to you in being brave.
Oh, this is such a good question. You could do like hours on this, right? Because the complexity of being raised as the only person of color in my all white family, my father's family was not around after he passed away. And so I was raised
Mm,
exclusively with the Irish McGuire family. Love them to pieces.
yeah.
And yeah, this audacity that comes with caucasity. The idea that, like, my mother poured into me in such a particular way. I think both our mothers did, poured into us in a way that really gave us a lot of advantage. It's like
Yeah.
I didn't know beyond like that I couldn't create what I needed for myself or what I wanted in the world.
Yeah.
Was shielded and protected from a lot of the harm in the world and of racism, gender bias, and beyond until I was old enough to, see it myself. I would say middle school, high school years. So at that same time, I'm having this awakening, understanding my relationship to blackness is being forged.
Hmm.
I remember I was at the lab schools, which is the like feeder school from the University of Chicago. And after, my mother allowed me to, I changed schools. I was like, this school is so wild. I don't fit in here. We don't have
Hmm.
any money. I was on scholarship. I was the scholarship kid. And I was like, I got to get out of here.
Hmm.
And so I transferred to an all black school. And I remember like, ooh, you couldn't tell me anything. I was all Malcolm X. I was Letters from Birmingham Jail. I had the medallion with the little Africa, I had the Gumby high top fade. And I was really like living into it. And my mother knew it. She said, I think that this school is going to be great for you because, you aren't connected to your black family. And I think that you've been in a mostly white environment. I think this is going to be good for you. Little did she know how bad it would be for her. I, I came home and I was like, you white devil. Do you know? I remember one time my mother said something about race, and I was like, you will never know what it's like to be a black man in America. And she was like, okay.
Yo, I had
So
the exact same conversation with my word for word, except man,
yeah,
I was like, I know that you've grown up around black people, and I know that I'm your daughter, and I know that you work with mostly black people, but you will never know what it's like to actually
exactly.
be black.
That's a special one. And then check her at, high school graduation. I was valedictorian, so she comes in with my whole white family. She's like they're the only white people in the auditorium, sitting in like the front row. And here comes my mother with a kente cloth
No,
wrapped around her shoulders. It's like, you take that off right now.
I did not
And so
approve
yeah,
this wardrobe.
the challenge of like, the perfectly imperfect, love and adoration she's showing and appreciation for her relationship to blackness
Hmm.
and the ways that that can be really challenging and like a very difficult spot for a white woman to see, particularly of that age group and in that time.
Yeah.
And still you and I both like holding our mothers to task. We do
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
And I did that for, did that for her. But yeah, it's complex. And I also think because of her way she moved through the world, she was dynamic. She was fierce. She was like a
Hmm.
fighter.
Hmm.
So I learned a lot of that from her, but also in a place of like reflection around race. She was raised at a time when like colorblind was the prevailing thought.
Hmm.
Like that was the positive aspect. If you were racist or you were colorblind. And so she was colorblind for a while. And I was like, oh, we're not doing that anymore. We have to come with me. We're going to upgrade.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now and so that's a journey too. It's
Yeah.
really difficult to know. Yeah.
Yeah, and as we're because of the work that we do, right? Because we're doing work in this, broadly defined or broadly stated like realm of social justice and impact and racial equity, et cetera, our work and our lives are so intertwined in that way. And so, being in Oakland during the Black Lives Matter movement was such a
Mm,
special moment to like be there and to experience that as, and I'll speak for myself, prior to that, growing up in Michigan, I identified with being biracial. I'm like, I'm mixed, right? That was like how I defined myself. And I still will acknowledge that I'm mixed, but being in Oakland during the Black Lives Matter movement, it really did politicize my blackness in a way that was only possible by like being there at that time in that moment. And it also forced some growth between me and my mom and our relationship. Because to your point about like, we're going to upgrade you from colorblind, I remember having a conversation with a lot of tension with my mom about like, I need you to know what I mean when I say white privilege, right? It's actually not about like how someone is acting towards me specifically because I'm black. It's about how they are moving through the world irrespective of who they're encountering, right? And so, we had these sort of watershed moments as my black identity became my primary identity, when in the past I've been
Mm,
like, yeah, I'm half black, half white. Now I'm like, I'm a black woman with a white mom. I'm going to acknowledge that having a white mother and having that proximity to whiteness has absolutely shaped my experience and continues to. But also politically, I identify as black. And that really does shape the way that I move through the world and what I'm committed to and what I'm fighting for more than anything.
it's so well said. It does make me curious. I don't know, like, how do you approach the idea that our whiteness, right, like gives us, it didn't give me any financial benefit, unfortunately, in my particular case.
Same.
But like, how do you feel like it impacts you when it comes to like dealing with white people and racism?
Yeah.
Like, do you feel the nuance of being black identified with white mother and then navigating racism with white people?
Yeah. I mean, for me, what it's really looked like is I have the cheat code. Like, I already know how
Yep.
y'all tend to move. And so nothing is surprising to me, right? I also think as someone doing racial equity work, it insulates me from some of the shock and frustration because I'm able to sort of be like, that's what to expect. I also think that it
Mm,
has helped me because I can sort of see the wheels turning behind the eyes at times to be able to frame or reframe things in ways that
mm,
don't coddle but do invite reflection, and being able to weave in my own experiences with my own identity and navigating proximity to whiteness, I think can also help folks better connect to me as messenger, right? Because I'm not a two-dimensional character myself. I have had my own journey with racism and with my own identity and other people's identity, and so I
mm,
think those sorts of things really help. And then I think the last thing I would say is like, uh I'm fine with white people being mad at me. Like, figure it out. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I'm mad all the time. And so, but I think some of that is like, I'm not afraid of you either. Like I think that that's getting at some of the audacity that I feel like um
mm,
I I embody and I'm proud of because I've been more willing to take risks in the face of folks who have more authority than me or more seniority than me or longer tenure. I'm like, I don't buy into any of this shit. So I'm just going to tell you what I think we should be doing, regardless of whether or not you want to listen. Right? That's sort of
mm.
how it shows up for me. What about for you?
Yeah, that tracks actually.
I'll just quit.
I've been in those rooms. I've been in those rooms with you. Yeah, I think that there's two parts. One is that because I grew up dependent on white people for my care and my early development of like how I understand love and being welcome and belonging, I feel like I really had to work much harder than other folks, maybe, who weren't the only person of color in an all white family, to extricate and to like dig in and
Mhm.
really get out some of the white supremacy that I digested.
Mhm.
Like my literal safety was dependent upon white people, and so
Yeah.
I was afraid of of my grandfather if I didn't behave the right way, or I was afraid that you know my acceptance into this family was conditional.
Mm.
And there were really harmful ways that I think that I was socialized into that. I'm a big guy. I'm like 6'1" and big, like big all the way around. And I feel like my family taught me very early, like, oh, you need to really like shrink yourself and to speak a
Mhm.
particular way, hold yourself a particular way, and be small because you're already black and that's
Mm.
dangerous. And
Yeah.
so the way you move through the world, you have to shrink yourself. So that was really not helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, complex, but not helpful. The second part is that, yeah, I'm used to seeing white people cry. White people have been manipulating me my whole entire
Since
life,
birth.
including my mother. Right. So white people will cry, and it
Yeah.
doesn't faze me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so moving through a space where white tears is a strategy and a technique that's like bing, bing,
Hmm.
that doesn't really like me as well. Also, I feel similar. I'm like I can hold white people accountable in a way because you deserve more.
Hmm.
I expect more from you, and you should expect more from you.
Yeah.
So I think it does give me a little bit of I can show up in your spaces, and I'm not surprised because I hear some of the things you say anyway.
Hmm.
And yeah, those are two main ways, but
What you just
it's more than
said,
a notion.
what you just said about like, I hear what you say anyway. Like, there's also, I feel there's a literacy that comes along with that proximity as well, right? Like, what's the question under the question that I think when you grow up with that proximity, you notice what's going unsaid more so maybe than
Mm,
folks who are this is like the first predominantly white organization they're a part of, or they haven't had close personal relationships with white folks where maybe they're kind of like, I'm reading it in this way and it's weird because when I answer it in this way they're not getting it right, or it doesn't land how I want it to, or there's something about that like knowing and that literacy that I think is also really helpful and strategic with what we're trying to accomplish, right?
yeah, I mean, another way of saying it might be like, oh, the proximity gave me the language and the like understanding of the culture. It's like I can be that like person that's not scary to you for a second
Yeah.
to get in close,
Right.
and once I'm in, then you're really in trouble.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it's true that like I learned how to speak, I learned how to dress, I learned how to I learned some of the cheat code, and so I recognize it, and I can use it to deconstruct some of the structures that I'm a part of. When
Hmm.
you bring me into your all white organization, you'll be glad at the front end, but you get really challenged towards the middle, and by the end, it really determines on how committed you are to change how you feel about my work. Yeah.
Yeah, and the point you made earlier in your introduction just about how important the people inside of organizations are, oftentimes I know we're doing this in service of the folks who are being impacted by either these broader systems or even inside of their own organizations. And
Mm.
if it takes me, like catching honey, or catching flies with honey in order to get it done, I'm okay with that. But just know that we still have to get it done because we are ultimately responsible for the experiences of the folks inside of this organization. And so what do we have to do to ensure that that people are having a good time? I don't think we need to be inside workplaces where people aren't having a good time, like why does it have to be traumatizing to go to work? It like we can do better.
Yeah, I mean, look, all of the ways in which these systems are kind of crumbling. Like, I look at organizations that are so many are in the nonprofit sector and in government are, restructuring and adapting towards a different landscape now. And I watch folks that we've learned that the model of the, single charismatic leader of an organization, that nobody in their right mind would be the ED of a giant organization in this culture in this time.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, so what does that mean for the work? Like, if you're focused on the vision, like you're saying, the impact is what we're headed for, and like the shape of the organization might have to change.
Hmm.
The strategy and the approach might need to change. It might need to look a particular way that doesn't feel great, as long as you're still getting to the outcome and the vision. And so I'm curious about like how leaders these days are kind of shaping themselves to navigate being untethered or being a part of a smaller org because the big orgs are just really struggling, in this context, both because of the administration and the legalities, but also because of where we're at as a society. The cultural challenges from inside a large organization are more impactful, like stronger than they've ever been.
Hmm.
I've seen organizations like people from the inside because, people are litigious, people are, not getting what they need. And yeah, it's a very curious time.
Well, and I think almost about like the era that we're in. So we have like pre-civil rights, post-civil rights. I feel like we have this sort of pre-George Floyd, post-George Floyd society that we're almost existing in. And it's not like it's post-racial. It's just like what were people willing to talk about before? Because like it didn't happen with Mike Brown or Trayvon Martin or and the list,
Mm,
right? it's there was something about this
Mm,
confluence of, COVID, George Floyd, like whatever, that really propelled the conversation forward. And I think changed in ways that has not reverted what people expect of their organizations. Whether or not they're continuing to invest in the same way 5 years out from 2020 is another story. But in terms of like, we can just look generationally, like Gen Z is like, absolutely not. Gen Z's in the workplace and they're like, a little too much sometimes, in my opinion, but another podcast. But they're kind of like the the floor is this, not the
yeah.
reach goal. And as a millennial, I feel like I sit sort of in the middle of that, right? And you're Gen X. I know that you hold more overlap in terms of what you think workplaces can and should be and look like with folks more so millennials, but having experienced, Gen X and boomers in the workplace and being like, what is wrong with y'all? But there's almost sort of this like the bar is higher now for everybody, and we
Absolutely.
have a
Yeah.
responsibility to help, like, and people have a responsibility to bring themselves up to that bar as well in this era.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're very generous to say that I'm like more leaning towards the millennial. I am. But the fact is that I still hold some of those ideas and I'm like, you don't have to do it how I did it. That's just stupid. Or you don't have to pay your dues. Like I always hated this idea that you have to pay your dues and then you get to do great work eventually. I'm like, if you aren't shaping your greatness along the way, you're not doing it right. But I do sometimes wonder, I'm like, so what is the plan?
Mm.
Like if I know that my strategy and my shape of like overextending and self-sacrifice is not appropriate for today's time, then I do want to see and I do want to learn like what is the new shape and how
Yeah,
does that work?
yeah,
Because you shouldn't have to self-sacrifice the way I did, but we do still need more outcomes than we're currently getting. So
yeah.
I'm excited for someone to show me what it is because it's coming. But
Well, I mean, so thinking back to your own experiences and the ways that you've guided leaders through the years, what are maybe some of
mm,
the values or skills or practices that still feel important now, even if we are being more human centered? Like, what still feels important?
wow. I mean, I have a long list, but I will start with, because being clear is a strong strategy for success and also for being kind. I think
Mhm.
folk leaders who are able to be clear is going to be evergreen,
Mhm.
right? And so that is some component of it is understanding yourself, what's going on with you, how you're approaching what your particular experience is, knowing that nobody is really agnostic, that you have a perspective,
Mhm.
but doing your best to understand yourself and do the work, your self work, so that you can show up for the community work in the best way. But knowing yourself gets you clear,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I was reading this book and it was wonderful that it says, this woman talks about the ways in which she would hope. She's like, oh, I hope this organization is like aligned with its values. I really hope that they're going to really advance what they say they're going to do. And then time after time being disappointed and letting down. And what happened is as she let hope die, she started to notice that she was much more sober in her assessment.
Mhm.
And so when you have hope, sometimes you have this like rose tinted glasses, you're going to act as if what you want to happen is hopefully going to achieve.
Mhm.
But really, your strategy can be off if you're not getting a sober and real assessment. So I also think that leaders have to have that clarity, not just for themselves, but like for what reading the ecosystem. I do a lot of the work that I did for myself as I transformed and came to Oakland was around understanding myself better, the mindful awareness, the connection to, my particular lineage is in Buddhism, but to understand what I believe and how to find alignment became very important. You're not doing that in your work and you can't see how your personal goals align with your professional goals, like there's a gap.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think it'll be clear to find your own purpose and alignment. Yeah,
I would
there's so
add,
many.
yeah, one thing that stands out to me, it's almost the flip side to the hope, like I hope that this blah blah blah. You remember we had a client very early on in our work together, and whenever we would have a meeting, and go walk through content, she would lead with, well, I'm worried about, I'm concerned about, like every single time.
Mm,
That was sort of her
mm,
starting orientation towards the progress. And so I feel like there's something in the middle around possibility. And because to me, that's the antidote to both, I hope, right? And like I'm worried about
mm,
is like, let's let's just presume that there's endless possibility that lies ahead, and let's map our strategies towards accomplishing that vastness of possibility versus the constrained, right? Or the unlikely. Like let's find something that
mm.
lives between the two.
I love that. I love that balance. Yeah. I remember who you're talking about. And just, I also remember conversations we've had about like, when is it time to just acknowledge like this ship is not sailing?
Mhm,
I feel
mhm,
like maybe, I don't know, maybe you and I have put a lot of eggs in baskets that never really like hatched.
mhm.
And I think that's okay. I think I learned from it, I grew from it. But I also think right now I'm a lot more discerning with the amount of time that I will spend on a project that I don't believe can actually take off. It's just there's so much good work to do in so many places. You don't have to be beholden to like an idea. And this is the last thing I'll say about the way that I think leaders need to continue to practice is I work for an organization that has a fellowship it's like leading from the inside out.
Mhm.
And it is transformative. Every year we get together with these 35 new leaders and we talk about like how do you move. You can be fooled in your undergrad, right? You have to like learn this text, learn this content, finish these tests and exams and like do well. And then as you get into your like grad school or beyond, you're like, oh, it's less prescriptive. It's not like you're ticking boxes. I have to learn this, this, and this. You start to transform into like, oh, now I'm starting to shape. And by the time you write your PhD, you're like creating new thought and
Mhm.
you're like, creating new document and research. And so to go from I'm learning and proving externally into like I'm learning to have vision and
Mhm.
to create, which is really like my leadership is coming from my inside out. I think that's a big transformation that leaders should be aware of, like where they're at in that arc. Yeah, in
Yeah.
order to be successful.
Yeah, and that makes me think about how important having like a personal mission statement is. That's something that I work with my clients on is like, irrespective of which organization you're a part of or which company you're working for or what stage of life you're in, and not that your mission, personal mission can't change, but I think there's a way to sort of
Mhm.
understand for yourself, these are my values, this is the world I want to create, and this is the way that I want to contribute to the creation of that world. And using that as sort of a framework for determining when to jump ship on something. Like that is a framework for discernment,
Mhm.
right? Does it fit inside of,
Mhm.
or can I nest it underneath this ultimate vision for, myself and my contributions and my purpose? And how can I also identify others who are aligned in certain ways with that mission as well?
Can you just say it one more time for the people in the back? Because I'm telling you, if you don't have that, please go and get you some
Yeah.
because it is such a worthwhile investment to like it is it's productive in like multiple ways. Like if you have that, then you have your mantra. It's on your board. You read it and you are clear about how you want to be in the world.
Mhm.
You also are like affirming, right? Every time you do something that aligns with your personal mission, with your professional goals, you feel aligned. That's a hit of dopamine that I need.
Yeah.
Like I really believe in that, Danielle. I know that you do that with your clients. I've referred people to you. I know that I know that you do that well, and I think it's a key component in practice
Well, I
for
think,
leaders today, for sure.
yeah, and coupling it with what I know is this realm that you bring to everything you do, which is tying in the mindfulness component and that present awareness and that self-awareness so that you
Mm.
can get quiet and like check in and use that intuition, whatever those sensations are, to help you make the next best step for yourself, even if you don't know what three steps ahead is. Like what happens next? What does that practice look like for you, and how do you share that with other leaders so that they're able to do that too?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a core foundational practice for any real leader that's serious about their own growth, development, and impact. So, all my clients I do mindful awareness with, whether it's breath or exercise or yoga, but you have to have a place that interrupts your kind of working mind so that you can take a breath and get a real honest, sober assessment of the conditions before you make your strategy.
Hmm.
So many of us are like eating priorities, running from one thing to the next. You don't stop to make a strong strategy, and then you're halfway through and you're wondering why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
For me, I have a daily meditation practice that's really useful for me. I don't think everyone needs to meditate daily, but I think you need to find a place.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think that self awareness can happen in so many ways. But I think, in addition to the meditation, I just recently turned 50 years old and I took a trip and I was gone for a month. I unplugged and I went to the continent for the first time and saw incredibly beautiful things. I think our relationship to nature is we're wired for it. If you're
Hmm.
accessing nature and that can be a really great grounding place. I set intentions for myself on this trip. I was like, who am I when nobody's looking? I think we need space to notice
Hmm.
who you are when every day. And I also like was inspired. I think it's important to find things that like bring you joy and inspire you like on the regular if you're not doing it once a month. So when I was in Africa, I went scuba diving at a place that I have been fantasizing about since I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
I didn't make it until I was 50, but it was like I saw the most wild critters like 50 meters under the ocean that just inspired my life. I studied leaders in Ghana and Accra that I have read about, but I went to their homes and I saw their writings. I saw where they gave their speeches from. And it's just yeah, and I came back so much more aligned, so much more confident, so much more affirmed.
Yeah.
Like you have to make the time for that piece of it. I mean, I know you travel as well, and I know that you're carrying some of those same transformations.
Yeah.
Curious about like how you feed yourself for that because I know you help others do it, but how are you doing it for yourself?
It's funny because yes, I've traveled a lot and I've been traveling since I was, pretty young. I went to my first like big trip was Australia and New Zealand when I was like 15, right? I went for 3 weeks and I got bit by the travel bug for sure. But it's interesting. I've traveled a lot less since the pandemic happened, and what has been most transformative for me over the last year is going within. Is actually like the
Mm.
journey that I've been on when I'm in my little reading nook in my bedroom and I'm quiet and I'm reflecting and I'm an extrovert too, as you know. And so one practice that I've been trying to adopt is like talk to myself first before I start blabbing whatever I'm going through to someone else. Some of that is my own, like, how can I learn to regulate my emotions? How can I learn to regulate my emotions instead of outsourcing my emotional regulation to other people? And even some of
Mm.
that, like, outsourcing is not about like solve it for me, but it is about like verbally processing this as a way of emotional regulation, which has its place. And I still vent and but I try and like stop for a moment first and sit with how I feel about it before sharing and taking in new information, right? So that I can start to form what my perspective of the experience is, or I don't get too far out from the somatic experience that I'm having and jump right up to like the logical mind, right? And so
Mm.
like
Mhm.
being able to do that even in my home, I can travel far in my heart and mind without having to like travel far physically. And then I couple that with times out of the country, times in other places where I'm having new experiences and connecting in new ways. But I want to be able to continue to do that integration even when I'm not in sort of this safe cocoon of Costa Rica yoga retreat for a week. Like I have to be able to do it every single day. Yeah.
I love that. Love that.
So I'm curious to know, and we're coming up on our time, but if you were to give advice to like younger leader Patrick or emerging leaders now, in addition to sort of the things that we talked about before, like what are your words of wisdom? What do you tell people to do or strive towards or practice?
Mm, yes, I would find consent before offering any advice. Because I don't want to be held accountable. But if I were talking to myself, I think that it's really challenging these days to see a pathway to leadership that isn't about transactional react relations. I think
Mhm.
that, being born and feeling super empathic was a gift for me. And so I would encourage folks to, figure out what is your particular brand and, don't be as susceptible as I was when I was younger to like, oh, this is what leaders look like. This is what, success looks like. It actually takes a montage of all kinds of different types of leadership styles. So your leadership style is valuable just inherently because it's yours.
Mhm,
And when you
mhm,
find other, you and I have been great partners.
mhm.
My business partners and I are great partners. When you find other great partners that kind of match your puzzle piece together, you can really make a powerful impact and have greatness like right at your fingertips. So I
Yeah.
think it's about, doing the work to get quiet, turning inward to learn something about yourself that can give you confidence so that when you meet the challenges of all the isms and you're the only blank in the room and you show up, that you can stand more confidently, grounded in who you are, who your community is. I think those are really important skills that don't get anywhere. You kind
Yeah.
of have to learn them on the fly. I wish I knew that when I was younger. I spent a lot of time bending, gymnasticking to think of what I thought professionalism and what I thought success would look like. And
Mhm.
it didn't serve.
Yeah, and comparison is the thief of joy, right? So the more that, like you said, we can anchor into, who we are, the better able we are to bring that authenticity and bring that sense of rootedness and immovability. I like to think of it like a big old tree, which can still be moved by the winds, but is rooted enough where it doesn't
Mm,
get blown away, like a leaf would, right? So there's like a bit more gravity to your center in that way. Um,
love
yeah,
that. Love
yeah.
that.
Well, this brings us, to the end of our time. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers and our listeners?
Excuse me. It's been such a pleasure. I hope that something I said was useful, and that it may catalyze a thought or a moment. But I'm a super fan of your work and your company. And so thank you for the invitation and the opportunity just to hang out and talk for a little bit. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to everyone for watching and listening. We'll be back next month with another one of these conversations. But Patrick, so grateful always for not only your presence and your brilliance, but also your friendship and your heart and that fly ass haircut you have. So until next time.
Thanks.